My name is Chloe Nelson, and if anyone ever asked me when I first started doubting the man I was about to marry, I wouldn't say it was when he raised his voice, and it wasn't when he set a contract down in front of me, either. It started earlier than that, the moment I realized Charles Foster's gentle smile could hide an intention so carefully prepared that there was no room left for me to step back. Before that day, I truly believed I was standing at the most beautiful stretch of my life. I said yes to Charles's proposal with a kind of peace I had rarely known, the kind that makes you think that after years of working yourself to the bone, taking care of yourself, forcing your way through seasons when no one had your back, you had finally met someone mature, polished, and sure of what he wanted. Charles spoke with calm confidence, carried himself with effortless courtesy, and talked about the future in a voice so steady that I had once found it more trustworthy than a promise. He used to say he loved my independence. He had watched me finish a difficult project, then smiled and told me that was what made me different. He had told his friends I wasn't the kind of woman who waited for someone else to build her life for her. Every time he said things like that, I thought, thank God, I found the right person. Someone who wasn't afraid of my light. Someone who wanted to walk beside me instead of standing in front of me. Maybe I trusted him too much. Maybe that was why what came next hurt as much as it did. That day, I was the one who started the conversation about life after the wedding. I thought it was the kind of talk any two grown adults should have. How we would arrange our work schedules, how we would handle finances. If we were both busy at the same time, then who would take on what at home, and if we had children one day, how we would adjust our careers so neither of us would have to be the only one making sacrifices. I went into that conversation feeling practical, honest, and almost relieved because I believed Charles and I were building an equal marriage. Charles listened until I was done, sat in silence for a moment, then set his glass down very gently. The way he looked at me then made the whole room feel colder. He spoke very clearly, very calmly, as if he were simply repeating a plan that had already been settled long ago. After we get married, I want you to quit your job. I thought I had misheard him. I even asked again on instinct, my voice dropping without me meaning it to. You mean take some time off or quit for good? Charles looked straight at me. For good. I want you to be a stay-at-home wife. I went still for a few seconds. Not because I had never heard of that kind of arrangement, but because it was coming from the very man who had once said he admired my self-sufficiency. I tried to keep my voice as calm as I could. Why? Charles leaned back in his chair and laced his fingers together, like he was explaining something perfectly reasonable. Because a family needs a woman who is fully devoted to it. My job makes enough to cover everything. I don't think my wife needs to keep throwing herself into work the way you do now. I looked at him, waiting for the second half of the sentence, waiting for some sign that this was a suggestion, an option for us to discuss together. But there was nothing. Charles's face was perfectly composed, the composure of a man who believed he was saying something entirely right. I asked again, more slowly this time. You used to say you loved that I had a career of my own. You used to be proud that I was independent. And now you want me to give all of that up? Charles exhaled, as if I were making everything more complicated than it needed to be. Chloe, admiring something is one thing, building a family is something else. I'm not marrying you just to split you with your job every night. The words hit me faster than I expected. I tightened my hands and looked straight at him. Stability does not mean I disappear from my own life. Something shifted in Charles's eyes. The softness I was used to was gone, replaced by the faint irritation of someone who was not accustomed to being challenged. You're looking at this too negatively. I'm offering you an easier life. You won't have to deal with pressure, competition, or deadlines. I think a lot of women would be grateful to have that choice. Grateful? That word hurt more than anything else. It wasn't just what he wanted, it was the way he said it, as if I should feel lucky to be asked to give up one of the most important parts of myself. In that moment, every compliment he had ever given me rose back up in my mind, wearing a different meaning. Had Charles only liked my strength because it entertained him, and now that it was about to enter a marriage with him, did he want to fold it down neatly into the role he had already chosen for me? Before I could say another word, Charles reached for a folder beside the table. He slid it toward me with a calmness so detached it sent a chill through me. My lawyer already prepared the prenup. I looked at the papers in front of me, then back at him. My heartbeat seemed to slow, as if my body understood before my mind did. This was not a premarital conversation where we were working things out together. This was a test, and he had already prepared the right answer in advance. Charles spoke again, his tone even. I think you should read it before we talk about the wedding date. I placed my hand on the edge of the folder, and in that exact moment, I understood that this could be the beginning of a marriage or the end of every illusion I had ever had about the man who was supposed to become my husband. That night, I took the prenup back to my apartment, set it on the dining table, and stood there staring at it for a long time, as if as long as I didn't touch it, everything could still go back to the way it was. Charles had handed it to me in a tone so calm it was almost unbelievable, as if it were just a neat procedural step before marriage, the kind of thing mature people did to avoid trouble later on. But the moment I held that stack of papers in my hands, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the usual hesitation of reading a legal document. It felt like someone had quietly measured out my life and boxed it in. I sat down and opened the first page. At first, everything was written in such polished, reasonable language, protecting premarital assets, limiting disputes in the event of unforeseen circumstances. But the more I read, the more I understood that this was not a safety net for both of us. It was a fence already built around me. There were clauses assuming that after marriage, I would prioritize my family role, adjust my work intensity, and consult my husband before making career decisions that might affect married life. Another section stated clearly that major investments, joint accounts, and access to the household's cash flow would be under Charles Foster's primary control if I were no longer working full-time after marriage. I read those lines over and over, my heart pounding so hard that my hands started to shake. What hurt the most was not that I hadn't signed it yet, but that all the loving words from before had suddenly revealed themselves in this cold, lifeless language. The man who had once held my hand and said, "I want your life to feel lighter. I don't want you to have to fight alone all the time anymore," was now using that very wish to script a life for me in which I would become weaker, slower, and have to ask for permission to decide my own future. The next morning, I met Charles as soon as he left his office. I didn't waste time. I put the prenup on the coffee table between us, pointed to each section, and asked him directly, "Why does a man who says he loves me need a document that puts me in such a vulnerable position?" Charles glanced at the papers, his expression unchanged. "You're looking at it too negatively." I gave a short, humorless laugh. Prioritizing family does not mean signing away my right to make my own decisions. He leaned back, his voice lower but harder than it had been the day before. "Chloe, marriage is about stability. If one day you have children, are you still planning to live like this? Always work, projects, and meeting schedules? Somebody has to know how to adjust. Know how to adjust, or give up my whole life to you? You're blowing this out of proportion. Your career isn't something that can't be adjusted." I looked straight at him. "No, I'm reading exactly what you want." For the first time, Charles's eyes lost that familiar calm. He was silent for a few seconds, then said something that made the whole room seem to miss a beat. "This isn't just my view. My family thinks the same way. A lasting marriage has to have order." The moment I heard that, my spine went rigid. His family. So behind Charles wasn't just one man with conservative beliefs, but an entire way of thinking that had been treated as the standard for a very long time. For the next several hours, I kept asking myself whether I was overreacting, or whether this was truly the kind of warning sign that, if I ignored it, would cost me years of my life. I called Nora Marshall first. After listening to everything, Nora immediately asked, "If your sister were the one signing those clauses, would you tell her to go through with the wedding?" I couldn't answer. She sighed and said slowly, "This isn't about money. It's about a man who wants to keep the power to define where your value lies." After Nora, I met Sophia Robinson. Sophia didn't get angry the way I expected her to. She just looked at me for a long time and asked, "If he truly respected you, why is your future written like something that needs to be managed?" That question stayed with me all afternoon. By evening, I took the prenup to Lucas Watson, the only lawyer I trusted enough not to sugarcoat things or try to scare me. Lucas read for a long time. He turned each page, jotted a few notes in the margins, then fell silent again. It was that silence that unsettled me most. I wanted to hear him say this was just a somewhat rigid contract, that wealthy people were often cautious, that everything could still be revised. But Lucas didn't offer me any easy escape like that. Finally, he set the papers down and looked up at me, his eyes heavy. "Chloe, you need to understand what he's really preparing for." The next morning, I took the prenup to Lucas Watson. I knew him through an old friend in the legal world, enough to understand that Lucas was not the kind of lawyer who would soothe me with comforting lies. He read it very slowly, turning each page as if every clause had another layer of meaning underneath it. I sat across from him, with my hands tightly clasped together, trying to stay calm, even though the sense of betrayal from the night before still sat raw inside me. When he was nearly done, Lucas looked up at me, his gaze direct and unmistakable. He said this was not a prenup written to protect two people entering marriage on equal ground. This was a framework of control, drafted cleverly, polished in its wording, but far too clear in its purpose. If I quit my job at my husband's request, there was no corresponding financial protection for me. If the marriage broke down later, the years I had sacrificed my career would barely count as something that deserved compensation. If I resisted the role of full-time homemaker, I could be painted as someone violating a family commitment. Lucas tapped one line lightly with his pen and said, "The most frightening thing isn't what these words say. It's what they reveal about how someone thinks about you when they write them." That sentence silenced me. I had thought the contract itself was what hurt the most. It wasn't. What hurt most was knowing that Charles had sat somewhere, with some lawyer, calmly imagining a version of our life in which I had to make myself smaller so he could feel secure. It was not one careless remark, not a moment of impulse, but a complete mindset, carefully prepared and dressed in such polite language that the person being cornered could easily end up blaming herself for reacting too strongly. As Lucas kept explaining, old moments began surfacing in my mind, things I had always tried to interpret gently. The time I came home late because of an emergency meeting, Charles had smiled and said he was only worried that one day I would love my job more than my family. The time my boss praised me in front of the whole team, he stayed quiet the entire drive home, then half joked, half sneered, asking whether I planned to become the kind of woman who only needed a career and no one beside her. Once, when I turned down a weekend trip because I had to finish a project, he looked at me for a long time before saying that too much ambition sometimes made women lose the most important thing they could ever hold on to. Back then, I had called all of it concern, a difference in perspective, the ordinary insecurity of a man about to get married. Sitting there in front of Lucas, I finally saw that those memories were not separate at all. They fit together, sharp and cold, like shards of glass. Charles had not changed overnight. He had been testing my boundaries for a long time. Every joke, every flare of irritation, every remark about ambitious women had been a way of measuring how far I would bend. I was the one who had softened every warning sign because I loved him and because I wanted to believe that the man I had chosen could not possibly see me as a project that needed correcting. Lucas brought me back to the present. He said that if I still intended to move forward, I should never sign a prenup that protected only one side. He told me to add reciprocal terms, the right to continue working without being pressured to quit, the right to keep my own income, and a clear compensation mechanism if I gave up career opportunities at my husband's request. Then he said something I knew I would remember for a long time. "You're not adding those clauses to save the wedding. You're adding them to find out whether that man is willing to enter a fair marriage." For the first time since I had held that contract in my hands, I no longer felt like someone backed completely into a corner. The pain was still there, low and throbbing, but above it was a new kind of clarity. I no longer wanted to ask Charles whether he loved me. I wanted to see how he would react when the balance of power no longer tilted entirely in his favor. That afternoon, I went to Charles Foster's house to pick up a few documents I had left behind. The door to his study was slightly ajar, and I heard Nathan Carter's voice on speaker, broken and faint through the call. I was about to announce that I was there, but Charles's answer stopped me cold. He gave a dry laugh, his voice low and so cold that I could hardly recognize the man who had once held my hand so gently. "Chloe's just being stubborn right now," he said. "Once we're married, she'll have to accept it. Everyone who enters marriage eventually understands they can't hold on forever to those childish fantasies of independence." I stood motionless outside the door, my heart pounding so hard that the hand holding the papers began to shake. In one very brief instant, The last piece of innocence inside me collapsed completely. Charles was not waiting for my consent. He was only waiting for the right moment, when I would have nowhere left to go. I tightened my grip on the prenup, feeling the edges of the paper press into my skin like a warning to stay clear-headed all the way through. If I kept going, I would not walk into the answer Charles had already written for me. This time, I would be the one asking the final question. I barely slept after meeting with Lucas Watson. I didn't lie there feeling sorry for myself, or mourning some version of love that had only just begun to crack. I lay there forcing myself to face what I had been avoiding for far too long. Charles Foster didn't just want me to marry him. He wanted me to step into a structure where all the risk belonged to me, while every real decision stayed in his hands. The next morning, Lucas sent back the revised draft with one additional line. It was short, but it cut straight to the heart of the problem, like a surgical blade. If I left my job at Charles's request to become a stay-at-home wife, then the entire post-marital financial framework had to be structured for my full protection, including my share of assets accumulated after marriage, compensation proportionate to the income I had given up, and clear legal accountability if the marriage ended or if his original promises were broken. I read that sentence over and over for a long time. It didn't feel like revenge. It wasn't a trap. All it did was turn the beautiful-sounding wish Charles always delivered in such righteous tones into an actual responsibility. If he truly believed my staying home was what was best for our family, then he had no reason to fear putting that commitment in writing. If he really loved me, he had even less reason to want me walking into a marriage with no safety net except his word. I asked Charles to meet me at his apartment late that afternoon. When I placed the revised draft on the table, I was so calm that even I found it strange. Maybe it was because the chaos inside me was gone. Once you start to see the true nature of a problem, pain gives way to clarity. Charles picked up the papers and read the first page with his usual composed expression still intact. But when his eyes landed on the added line, I saw his jaw tighten. He read it again, more slowly this time, as if he hoped he had misunderstood. He looked up, his voice dropping. "Who wrote this for you?" I met his eyes. I asked for it to be added. "Chloe, this isn't a prenup anymore. This is an adversarial financial negotiation." It was always a negotiation, Charles. The only difference is that before, every term leaned in your favor. His eyes darkened. "You're talking like a lawyer." I answered immediately, my voice still even. "Because you were the one who brought the law into marriage first." He dropped the papers hard onto the table. The sound was dry and sharp enough to make the whole room feel like it shook with it. "Do you really think I'm going to sign this? You're turning marriage into a business deal." Something inside me went cold then, completely, sharply, cleanly. "No, Charles. I'm turning your request into a responsibility. If you want me to walk away from my career, my income, and my ability to protect myself, then you need to be decent enough to take responsibility for that decision." He gave a faint, mocking laugh, but it lasted only a beat. "You're planning your exit before we're even married. How is that worse than your original prenup, which was already designed to pressure me into dependence?" That hit exactly where he didn't want to be touched. Charles shot to his feet. "Dependence? That's the word you're using with me? I'm offering you a stable life, a safe life, one where you don't have to run out into the world working as if you constantly need to prove yourself to everyone." I stood too, but I didn't raise my voice. "I don't need a kind of safety that exists only within the limits you allow. I need respect." He stared at me as if I had said something deeply offensive, and that was the moment I understood the most frightening part of all. If he were a man who had simply been misunderstood, he would have looked hurt. He would have tried to explain. He would have asked why I thought so badly of him. But Charles wasn't upset because I had misjudged him. He was angry because I had disrupted a power structure he thought I would obediently step into. "You're letting outsiders poison you," he said, each word sharper than the last. "A wife should not make her husband sign terms as if he's some man about to harm her." I looked at him without flinching. A husband who loves sincerely would never see fairness as an insult. His face changed completely. Every layer of politeness, control, and softness he had always maintained in front of me seemed to crack all at once. "Do you know what your problem is, Chloe? You're so used to making your own decisions that you don't understand marriage needs order. The husband is supposed to be the central one, carrying everything. The wife is safe when she knows her proper place. After I heard that, my heartbeat slowed strangely. I wasn't shocked anymore. What remained was only a chilling kind of clarity. I was standing in front of the man I had planned to marry, and for the first time, I was hearing his real beliefs speak out loud. I picked up the prenup and neatly stacked the pages back together. Then maybe this isn't about whether you sign it or not anymore. Charles stepped toward me, his gaze sharp as if he meant to force me backward. You should think very carefully before you let one line destroy everything. Before I could answer, my phone rang in my pocket. The name on the screen made me stop cold. Ariana Taylor. I answered. On the other end, her voice was quiet but firm, completely unlike the polished civility she had always used with me before. Chloe, can you meet me tonight? Before you sign anything, there's something about our family I need to tell you. I looked at Charles standing in front of me, and his eyes changed instantly when he saw who was calling. And in that very moment, I knew whatever secret Ariana was about to reveal would not save Charles. It would only make me understand him more deeply, in a far more frightening way. I didn't ask to meet Ariana Taylor. She was the one who messaged me first, brief and unsparing, with no softness in her tone and no trace of pleading. She only said that if I was still serious about understanding what I was really standing in front of, she wanted to meet me once, without Charles Foster there. I read that message over several times. At that moment, I had only one thought in my head. Charles's mother had finally shown up to clean up the mess her son had made, and she would probably do what so many families do, turn control into concern for the future, turn humiliation into a difference in perspective. I walked into that meeting as guarded as I could be. I had already braced myself for lines like, "Charles just loves you too much," or "Sometimes men just speak a little harshly." But Ariana didn't say anything like that. She looked at me for a long time, long enough for me to realize the exhaustion in her eyes was not something anyone could fake. Then she said plainly, "If you came here expecting me to defend Charles, you'll be disappointed. I don't dare to keep lying to myself anymore." That first sentence made me stop cold. Ariana didn't waste time circling the point. She told me about her marriage to Liam Baker, Charles's father, in a voice so calm it sent a chill through me. She said that when she was young, she had also believed that marrying a man who was good at making money was a kind of blessing. Liam was generous with other people, polished at parties, and always knew how to make others believe he was the model provider. But behind the doors of their home, money was not a tool of care. It was a set of reins. He decided who got to spend what, when, and for what reason. At first, it was only small questions. Do you really need that? And then it turned into long interrogations every time she wanted to spend anything on herself or on her child. Little by little, Ariana stopped asking. She trained herself to get used to asking permission in her own life. She said the most dangerous thing was not shouting or flashes of temper, but the feeling of being conditioned to believe that your right to make your own decisions was selfishness. I sat there in silence, hearing each word fall like shards of glass. Ariana wasn't trying to paint Liam as a monster. She was simply describing, truthfully, a kind of man who uses family responsibility to disguise his need for control. He always said everything he did was to keep order in the house, she said, and Charles grew up inside that distorted definition. I hadn't expected her to speak about her own son so directly, without trying to soften any of it. Ariana admitted that she had seen signs of control in Charles a long time ago, the rigid ideas he had about the roles of men and women, the way he became uncomfortable when a woman earned more money, or cared too deeply about her own work. But she had kept reassuring herself that it was only conservatism, only family influence, and that he would grow out of it as he got older. When she reached that part, she paused, and her voice dropped. I stayed silent for too long, and that silence helped raise the man he is now. For the first time since everything began coming apart, I felt something even more unsettling than anger, understanding. I understood that Charles had not become this way out of nowhere. He was the product of a home where financial power was treated as the foundation of order, where the man who controlled the money also kept the final say. But understanding the cause did not make the consequences any lighter. If anything, it made me clearer. Because if this was a value system that had been rooted in him since childhood, then our future marriage would not be colliding with some temporary disagreement. I would be stepping into an entire toxic structure that had been built long before I ever appeared. I told Ariana exactly that. I said I could understand why Charles thought the way he did, but I could not use that understanding to sign my name to a life where the price would be my voice, my work, my independence. Ariana nodded immediately. She did not ask me to forgive Charles. She did not ask me to give him another chance. That, more than anything, made the conversation feel painfully real. She only said, "You are not responsible for healing what my family broke." I left that meeting with a weight in my chest that felt like stone. I mourned the man I had once loved, mourned the version of Charles I had believed was building a future with me, and at the same time, I had never felt more clear-headed. I had barely gotten into my car when my phone vibrated. A message from Sophia Robinson lit up the screen, short and urgent, like she didn't dare call me outright. "Chloe, you need to know this right now. Charles has been quietly contacting your company to ask about your promotion plans." I went completely still, my hand clamping around the phone until it went numb. Everything had just crossed into an entirely different line. Charles no longer just wanted to control me with words or with contract clauses. He had started reaching into my career behind my back. After meeting Ariana, I stopped looking at this like a woman trying to save a relationship. I looked at it like a diagram instead, one step at a time, one action at a time. Sophia Robinson had sent me a few scattered pieces of information before, and back then, I still wasn't ready to fully believe it. But this time, I asked her to verify everything more carefully, and what came back made me go cold. Charles had been trying to dig into my promotion track at work, not through me, but through someone who had once worked on a project with HR. He asked whether I was on the shortlist for a new management position, whether I was negotiating for more authority, and even whether the company was planning to retain me with a long-term compensation package. I sat staring at my phone screen for a long time. If this had just been curiosity, he would have asked me directly. If this had been a concern, he wouldn't have gone around me and through other people. The way he did it was exactly how someone acts when they're assessing how dangerous I am to the plan they've already made. He didn't need to know whether I was happy in my job. He needed to know whether I was ambitious enough to refuse to crawl into the stay-at-home wife role he had already built in his head. The pain inside me was no longer hot by then. It turned into something cold and sharp. I understood one thing with complete clarity. This was no longer a disagreement about marriage. This was a man quietly reaching into the career of the woman he was about to marry, just to measure how independent she still was, and how much strength she had left to resist him. And once I saw that, I realized what had been violated was not just love. It was my personal boundaries, my self-respect, and the place I had spent years building for myself. I called Charles that same evening. No lead-in, no circling it. "Why were you asking about my job behind my back?" There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then he answered in that familiar calm voice, the one that used to make me believe he was a man who knew how to control his emotions. "I just wanted to understand our future more clearly." I laughed, short and cold. "Our future? Or how difficult will it be to control?" Charles exhaled hard. "Chloe, you're taking this too far. I'm about to marry you. I have a right to know what direction my wife's life is heading. You do not have the right to ask other people about my career plans. My job is not a file for you to evaluate." He started losing patience. I could hear it in every word. "You turn everything into a battle. I'm just trying to make sure that after we get married, we're not living like two strangers with two separate egos." I tightened my grip on the phone. "Tell the truth, Charles. What are you afraid of?" This time, he didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, but also so honest that it was brutal. "What I'm afraid of isn't you suffering. What I'm afraid of is you not needing me." The words landed between us like a hammer. Before I could say anything, he kept going, as if once the surface cracked, everything underneath came pouring out. "I don't hate your job. I hate that it makes you not dependent on me. A wife who's too successful will always think she can decide everything for herself. And then eventually, the husband is just an option, not a position." I closed my eyes. So this was who he really was. Not a man who loved family, who was mature, who wanted to build a home, but a man who only felt safe when the woman beside him had to make herself smaller. If I married him, I would not be walking into a marriage. I would be walking into a structure where love was only given on the condition that I knew how to cut pieces off myself. I hung up before he had the chance to change his tone again. That night, I sent every message, note, and piece of information Sophia had verified to Lucas Watson. He called me back almost immediately, his voice steady, clear, and grounded. Lucas told me to keep everything, screenshots, call logs, and even every time Charles changed his story. He reminded me of one thing that I still remember word for word. When controlling people realize the old method isn't working, they don't stop. They just change tactics. Nora Marshall didn't ask for more details. She just sat across from me, looked at me for a long moment, and said, "A marriage that begins with control will not magically turn into peace just because there's a wedding dress, white flowers, and people offering blessings." I thought that after that confrontation, Charles would either keep being angry or go silent to punish me. But the next morning, he sent a very short message. "If you want, we can meet again. Redo the prenup. I accept the clause you added." I read that line over and over until I knew every period by heart. His agreement had come too quickly to reassure me. It only sent a chill down my spine, because I knew Charles was not the kind of man who gave ground after one argument. I stared at the phone screen for a long time, wondering whether he was truly accepting fairness or getting ready to find another way to keep the upper hand. I arrived at the prenup signing 10 minutes early. I didn't want to walk in there still carrying the hope that I could be soothed, persuaded, comforted into staying. I sat with my back straight, set my bag beside my chair, opened the contract with the line I had added, and read it one last time as if I were reading a declaration to myself. If today revealed even one more detail pushing me toward making myself smaller, I would stop everything. No more negotiating, no more chances. Charles Foster came in a little later, unusually calm. The tension that had marked his face in earlier meetings was gone, and even his voice was lower, softer. He sat down, looked at me for a moment, and said he had spent a lot of time reconsidering things, that a marriage should not begin as a tug-of-war, that he was willing to revise the clauses that had made me feel cornered. A week earlier, maybe that would have relieved me. But now, that politeness only made me more wary. I knew Charles well enough by then to understand that sometimes composure is the final mask of someone who has no intention of losing. The lawyer went through each clause, revising the language line by line. Charles nodded along quickly to the sections about property, privacy, and even the provision I had added, stating that any decision involving where I lived, my work, or my income could never become a condition for maintaining the marriage. In front of everyone, he even said that he respected my ambitions and had never wanted to forbid me from working. He chose his words carefully, skillfully enough to sound reasonable, smoothly enough to make outsiders think every misunderstanding was about to be cleared away. But then he continued, still in that same calm voice, saying that once we had children, he would simply hope I could be flexible and prioritize the family more. He said he was not against my career, only that a good wife should know when it was time to step back. He said he would gladly support me in starting something less demanding, or working part-time, or taking a few years off to build a solid home first and return later. A chill went straight down my spine. Every path he laid out ended in the same place, me walking away from where I stood. I lifted my eyes and looked directly at him. "You're learning how to soften the thing I already said no to. You're not learning how to respect what I want." The room went still for a few seconds. Charles pressed his lips together, then gave a faint, humorless smile. He said I was turning his good intentions into something extreme, that every marriage required someone to adjust their priorities, that he only wanted to protect me from a draining, exhausting grind. I didn't let him steer the conversation any further. I asked him plainly, if he truly respected me, why did every solution he offered end with me stepping away from my career? Why was it never him adjusting his life to share the weight with me? Charles started losing patience. He said men and women had different roles, that he was simply being more realistic than I was, that a family could not function if everyone insisted on clinging to their ego. I was about to answer when Nathan Carter, who had been sitting beside him the entire meeting, cut in with the nervous eagerness of someone trying to save the situation. He gave an awkward laugh and said Charles was just overthinking things, that he had always talked like that, like back when he bet his friends that after we got married, I probably wouldn't last more than 6 months at my company. No one spoke immediately after that. I turned to look at Nathan first. then at Charles. The color drained from his face in an instant. He told Nathan to shut up, but it was too late. A moment earlier, the room had still been holding on to some veneer of civility. Now it felt stripped bare. All his justifications about responsibility, love, stability, everything suddenly collapsed into one cheap bet, where my future was nothing more than a measure of his masculine victory in front of other men. "So that's what this was," I said slowly. "This was never about you believing you knew what was best for me. This was about proving that in the end, I'd be bent to fit what you wanted." Charles couldn't deny it anymore, so his voice turned cold instead. He said I was making too much of it, that men sometimes said exaggerated things to each other, that it didn't mean he didn't love me. I laughed, and for the first time in weeks, my laugh didn't tremble. I told him the line I had added to the prenup was never meant to save this marriage. It was only a final test to see whether his love could survive fairness. The answer was right in front of me. Charles picked up the pen and signed his name with such force that the paper shifted under his hand. Then he shoved the contract forward and looked at me, no longer pretending to be gentle. "If you don't want to be a wife in the way I need," he said, each word thin and sharp as a blade, "then maybe we shouldn't get married." The whole room fell silent. I looked at the signature, the ink barely dry, and felt something inside my chest go strangely light. I no longer saw it as the moment I was being abandoned. I felt freed, and I understood that whatever I chose next would not just end a wedding. It would give me back my full right to be myself. I didn't sign. When those words actually left my mouth, they didn't ring out the way breakups do in the scenes people imagine. They didn't shake the room, and they didn't make anyone instantly fall apart. They just landed cleanly, decisively, like a final door closing behind me. And because it was that calm, I understood that I had reached the point of no return. When I walked away from that signing table that day, I didn't feel like I had defeated anyone. I just felt empty. A very real, very human kind of emptiness. I had once believed I was going to marry Charles Foster, that we would live in the house we had chosen together, that we would have busy but peaceful mornings, that we would call each other family without ever having to wonder who held the power in the relationship. Losing that future hurt. I was ashamed of how long I had tried to explain away things that had been obvious all along. I grieved for the version of me who had sat there dreaming of a future where she was loved, when the truth was that I was being loved on terms. But the deepest pain wasn't about losing a man. The deepest pain was knowing I had come close to saying yes to trading myself for a feeling of security. I had almost agreed that my career could be pushed aside, that my voice could be made smaller, that my worth could be rewritten in legal language as long as the ending still looked like a beautiful marriage. A few days later, the outside opinions started coming in. Some people said I was being too sensitive, that a prenup was not that big a deal. Some said every marriage requires sacrifice, and that a smart woman knows when to bend. Some even felt sorry for me, as if I had shattered something precious over a few lines on paper. I didn't argue much. I only said one thing to the people who truly wanted to hear it. The issue was never whether I signed a contract or not. The issue was whether I was willing to let someone else define my value and call that love. The line I added to the prenup didn't ruin a wedding. It simply exposed the truth of that marriage before I stepped into it and got trapped there. Lucas Watson was the first person to pull me out of blaming myself. He sat across from me in our usual coffee shop, listened until I had said everything, and then told me quietly, "Protecting yourself isn't selfish, Chloe. You're not running away from marriage. You're stopping before an unfair arrangement." That helped more than I can say. I realized that reason isn't cold. Sometimes it is the very thing that saves you from a long-term hurt. Nora Marshall held me for a long time before she said, "There are some things that, once you give in on them, you'll spend years paying for." Nora didn't comfort me in a sweet, soothing way. She reminded me of dignity. She reminded me that women are often taught to preserve a relationship at any cost, when the thing most worth preserving is their own self-respect. Sophia Robinson called me late one evening, her voice gentle but steady. She told me she was proud of me for stopping when I did. Just that one sentence was enough to make me feel less alone, to remind me that there are people who can see the truth without needing me to explain every piece of it. As for Charles, he didn't get a dramatic ending. There was no public collapse, no cinematic punishment. He was simply left with his own value system, One where love has to come with control, where marriage only feels safe if the woman stands one step beneath him. And that was the most realistic ending of all. Men like Charles are not truly defeated when they lose a woman. They are left behind in a world of their own making, a world where fewer and fewer people are willing to stay. As for me, I went back to work, back to the rhythm of my life, but not as someone who had failed and was trying to piece herself back together. I returned as someone who had finally chosen to stand on her own side. I was not refusing to be a wife. I was refusing to become a smaller version of myself just to fit someone else's expectations. Some dreams fall apart not to leave you empty-handed, but to make you stop clinging to what was never truly yours. Only then did I understand that what I had reclaimed after all of it was not just my freedom, but my own voice, the one thing I should never have been willing to bargain away in the first place.